Hello friends, here we are going to study about the Income Tax Act 1961, and this video would help you to learn about all the topics related to the Income Tax Act. So let's start it. Firstly, the history of income tax in India. It was first introduced by Sir James William in 1860, and with amendments, Income Tax Act was again passed in the years of 1886, 1918 and 1922. But finally, Income Tax Act 1961 was passed and it was implemented from 1st April 1962, which is a very important date that you have to remember, that Income Tax Act was implemented from 1st April 1962. Now also we are using the same act, but yes, many amendments have been done in the act, but the Income Tax Act 1961 we are still using it. Now let's see that what is tax. Tax is a compulsory duty charged or imposed by the government of such country. The duty which the government charges on us for, of course, many purposes that the government has to fulfill for the country, for maintaining the infrastructure of the country, for the economic development of the country. Tax is of course necessary to be imposed by the government of country. Now let's have a look at the types of taxes. There are two types of taxes, direct taxes and indirect taxes. Okay, so now we will understand the difference between direct taxes and indirect taxes. Firstly, we can see that there is a difference on the burden of the taxes that falls upon the people. In the case of direct taxes, the burden falls on the person who makes the payment to the government. It means the person on whom the tax is imposed, he only has to make the payment to the government. But in the case of indirect taxes, the government, another person is paying it to the government, but the burden is borne by another person. Suppose in the case of GST etc., if you take, then who is bearing the final burden of the tax? They are mainly the consumers who are purchasing the final product. But who pays it? The manufacturer or the middlemen who are involved in the between of the trade cycle, they all pay it to the government. But the final burden in the case of direct tax, suppose in the case of income tax, that tax has to be paid to the government by that person only on which it is imposed. Now, shifting of a tax, direct taxes cannot be shifted because the same person has to pay it. But in the case of indirect taxes, the burden can be shifted to another person's. Progressiveness, what is this? Actually, we have two topics. One is progressive and the other one is regressive. In the case of progressive, what happens? That progressive taxes are those taxes which increases according to the income of the people. If the income increases, then the tax burden also increases. And the regressive taxes are such that is just the opposite of the progressive one. When your income decreases, then the tax burden increases. So in the case of indirect taxes are generally regressive because the real burden is on the poor people, because the poor people or mainly the consumers who are purchasing the final product, they are not so rich as compared to the middleman or the businessman, but the indirect taxes has to be borne by the final consumers. But in the case of direct taxes, they are progressive because it is directly related to the income of the consumer, income of the person, so their real burden is more on the rich. For example, in the case of direct taxes, it is income tax and corporate profit tax, and in the case of indirect taxes, it is sales tax and VAT. These taxes are not mainly in use now. So here we can take the example of GST, goods and services tax. Here, because we are going to study all about the income tax, then let's see that who is liable to pay income tax in our country as India. So here you can see that individuals earning more than the income threshold of rupees 2.5 lakh per annum are liable to pay income tax in India. It means if you have an income of more than 2.5 lakh, then it means that you need to pay the income tax. Now, who are liable? Not only the individuals, but here the body of individuals also. The body of individuals, then you have the association of persons, then the partnership firms and the corporate firms, and the Hindu undivided family. They all are liable to pay income tax. Then if you see in the case of partnership form, then the income tax shall not be payable by the partners in receipt of the share of income by him from the partnership forms. It means if the partnership firms are paying the income tax, then the partners who are getting a share of profit from the firm, they don't need to again deposit the income tax on their income. Now the Hindu undivided family, the same is the case here also. If the members are receiving any amount from the HUF, then that will be exempt from tax in their hands if the HUF is paying the tax on it. Okay. Now here you can see that we have 5 sets of income. First one is the income from salary. Then we have the income from house property, income from business and profession, income from capital gains, and income from other sources. These are the 5 sources of income that an individual can have. Okay, so on all these heads means whatever the income we are earning, it will fall under any of these 5 heads, and according to this we have to charge the income tax on it. We have different rules for all the 5 heads of income, which we are going to discuss it later. Before proceeding on the 5 heads of income, we have to study about the residential status of an individual. For determining the income tax liability of an individual, we have to first determine the residency status of the individual. So here we have first 2 basic conditions that we need to check for determining it. The first one is this, that we need to check that whether the individual has lived in India for more than 182 days in the financial year. Okay, as you can see here on the screen, if he lives in India for more than 182 days in financial year, or if in India he has spent 60 days in the preceding financial year, and in the preceding 4 years he has spent more than 365 days. Okay, I hope I am clear. The basic condition is this, that we need to check if he was in India for more than 182 days in financial year. If this is not fulfilled, then we check it for the last 4 years. It means in the last year he should have remained for 60 days, and in the last 4 years he should have been in India for more than 365 days. Okay, if he fulfills both the conditions, then we can say him as a resident. If he doesn't fulfill any of the conditions of these 2, then he is a non-resident. Okay, now if in case he is a resident, then we need to check the further conditions. We have to check that whether in the preceding 10 financial years, in 10 financial year out of 9, okay, in 9 financial years out of 10, if he is a non-resident in India, in that case we will call him as resident but not ordinary resident. Okay, the second condition is this, that in the preceding 7 years he was less than 729 days in India. In that case also we will call him as resident but not ordinary resident. Okay, there are 2 conditions we have to check in 10 years. If out of 10 in 9 years he was a non-resident, in that case he would be a resident but not ordinary resident. If in the preceding 7 years he has spent less than 729 days, in that case also he will be called a resident but not ordinary resident. If he doesn't fulfill any of the conditions, it means he was a resident in last 10 years, then he has spent more than 729 days in the preceding 7 years, then in that case we would call him as resident but ordinary resident. Okay, so in our residency status we have 3 basic categorization according to which we can classify it. The first one is the resident. Okay, then the second one is non-resident, and if he is a resident also, he can be a resident but not ordinary resident, and resident but ordinary resident. Okay, according to the residency status that we have studied earlier, here we are going to study about the incidence of tax that mainly depends upon the residency status of the individual. We have 4 categorization here, 5 category here. The first one is income received or deemed to be received in India, whether earned in India or elsewhere. If you are receiving any income in India, whether you have earned that income in India or elsewhere, then that income is considered as a taxable income for all the categories, means whether he is an ordinary resident or non-ordinary resident or non-resident. If you have received any income in India, then that will be taxable in India. Then the second thing is that income accrues or arises or is deemed to accrue or arise in India, whether received in India or elsewhere. If you're receiving it in India or somewhere else also, but it is arising from any source of property or any source which is in India, then that income will be taxable for all the categories. Now the third one is that income which accrues or arises outside India. It is accruing outside India and you are receiving it also outside India from business control from India, but that business is present in India. Then in the case of ordinary resident and resident but not ordinary resident, in all these cases it will be considered as a taxable income for all those persons. But in the case of a non-resident, if you are receiving any income from a business control from India but that you're receiving outside India, then that will not be a taxable income for the non-resident. Okay. Now the fourth way is that if any income is accruing or arising outside India from any other source, then that will only be a source of income for the resident person. But in the case of non-resident and in the case of resident but not ordinary resident, it will not be a taxable income. Now, income is accrued or arise outside India. The income is accruing outside India, you are receiving it also outside India during the years preceding the previous years, and you are getting it in India during this year, then that income will not be a taxable income for any of the person. It means that you have received, if you have received the income in the previous years and you are now getting it in India in this year, then that will not consider be taxable income for all the categories. So like this we have to decide that whether any income will be a taxable income for this year or not. Now we are coming upon all the 5 heads of income that we have studied earlier. The first one is the income from salary. As you know, for the salary we must have an employer and employee, and what all the things the employer gives him, whether it is in cash or in kind, that all is considered as to be a part of the salary. Now income from salary includes the wages, the pension, the annuity, the gratuity if you are getting it, the fees, the commission, profits, leave encashment, annual accretion, and the transfer balance in the PF account, and of course the pension account. All these heads of income that we have studied earlier, we are getting it from the employer, and all these are given by the employer to the employee. So in all the cases it will be considered as an income from salary. The second one is that the income from the house property. Now income from house property is added to the person's total income only if such house or part of the house is let out. If you are giving it on rent for whole year or part of the year, or you are deriving any benefit from that property in the previous year, then that will be known as income from house property. But if you are living in the house and you're not giving it on rent, you're not letting it out, then in that case there will not be any income from the house property. Now let's see that how we are going to calculate it. How the computation is made? First you have to determine the gross annual value. And what is the gross annual value? Gross annual value is the amount of rent that you receive from the house property in any year. From that you have to deduct the municipal taxes that you have paid for it. Then by deducting the municipal taxes we arrive at the net annual value. From that we have to do a standard deduction of 30%, which is given under section 24. Now if you have borrowed any capital for that property, then the interest which you are paying for it can also be deducted here. Then by deducting this you get the income from house property, which will be taxable. Okay. So gross annual value minus the municipal taxes is net annual value. Then from that we can have a standard deduction of 30%. Then the interest on borrowed capital, that will be the income from house property. Okay. Now our third head of income is the income from business and profession. Now let's see what is business and what is profession. In the case of business, it includes any trade, any commerce or manufacture, or any adventure which you are doing in the nature of trade, commerce or manufacture, that all will be included in the case of business. Now profession is an occupation in which you require your own specialized knowledge and a skill. Suppose you are having a coaching center or you are giving any professional services like a lawyer or a doctor, then that all is a profession. And The vocation is an activity in which an SSC has a specialized skill for earning income. So these were the three heads: business, profession and vocation, that we have studied earlier. Now let's see that how do we compute the income from business. You all must be knowing that every business firm or company or whatever it is preparing a profit and loss account. So what we have to do, we have to simply take the net profit as you are taking it out from the profit and loss account, and in that you have to add the expenses disallowed. Means in the profit and loss account we are deducting all the expenses. So we have certain expenses that are disallowed from the income tax act viewpoint. So all those disallowed expenses we have to add back, and we have to deduct the income stated in P&L account under different heads of income. If in the P&L account you have written it in some other forms, the income is there, then that you have to again deduct it here. Then we have to deduct the expenses which we have not debited to P&L account allowed as per provisions. We have different set of rules for the P&L account also. So if we have not debited any expenses there, then that expense we are again going to deduct from here. Then that will be income from business. All these categories, the disallowed expenses and the expenses which are not debited to P&L account, we are going to study further. But according to the format we have this, then we get the income from business. And the income from profession, the receipts which you are getting from the profession, of course it would be on cash basis. From that you have to deduct all the payment that you are doing for the profession. Suppose you have a coaching center, then if you are paying it for if you are paying some side to the teachers which you have employed for teaching there, so all those expenses you will be deducting here, then that will be the income from profession. So in this manner we have to calculate the income from business and profession. Now there are certain expenses that the Income Tax Act disallows to be deducted from the net profit. So what are those expenses? Let's have a look. The first one is that the expenditure and advertisement and so on of political party. If for the political parties there that is doing an expenses for its advertisement, then that expenses is not to be deducted for the income tax point. Now the second one is that if you are doing any payment outside India and that is interest without TDS, you are not deducting TDS from it, then that will be disallowed. Then if you are making any payment to the residence and any payment without TDS on which the TDS is to be deducted, if there is a provision of TDS to be deducted on any payment that you are doing but you are not doing it, then that expenses won't be allowed to be deducted from the P&L. Okay, now here we have certain conditions. If the recipient has furnished return of income under section 139 and if he has taken such income for computation of income and if he had paid the tax, means is the thing is that the person to whom we are making the payment and we have not deducted the TDS because of these reasons, because he has furnished the return of income and he had paid tax on that income, then in that case the expense won't be disallowed. In all the other cases, if you are making any payment to the other persons and there is a provision of TDS to be deducted from that, tax on perks of employees which is exempt. If the employer is giving any perquisites to the employees and if it is paying any tax on it, then that would be exempt. Now the last point is that if you are paying any penalty or fine or interest on penalty, then all these things are not to be counted as an expense for the income tax viewpoint. Okay, now the second thing is the expenses expressly allowed. The rent, rates, taxes, repairs and insurance for building are the expenses. Now the second is that if you are spending any money for the repairs and insurance of machinery, plant and furniture, then the depreciation allowance. Then if you are depositing any amount in your tea, coffee or rubber development account, then that is also treated as an expense. If you are expending for acquisition of patent right and copyright, that is also an expense. Insurance premium and premium for insurance on health of employees, these all expenses are deductible. Now we have certain points here that we need to keep it in mind. Maintaining the books of account is mandatory if income is more than rupees 1,20,000. Okay, so if income is more than 1,20,000, then the SSC is mandatory to maintain the books of account. Now the total sales turnover, gross receipt is more than rupees 1 lakh. Okay, in the case of profession, if your receipt is more than rupees 1 lakh, or if your total sales is more than rupees 1 lakh, they need to maintain the books of account. For business, having gross receipt of more than 1 crore is liable for tax audit. It's completely a different topic. If your gross receipt has more than rupees 1 crore, then you need to go for the tax audit. Okay, now the next thing is our presumptive taxes. Presumptive means that the business SSC is not preparing a proper P&L account and everything. He is just declaring profits. So he can use this facility. If the turnover is less than rupees 2 crore, then he can use this facility. Okay, then here the profits must be at least 8% for the non-digital transactions and 6% for the digital transactions. Now here we have certain businesses that are excluded for opting this taxation provision. The first one is the LIC agent, the life insurance agent. Then the case of commission of any kind, or if you are running the business of applying, hiring or leasing goods carriages, then all these cases you can't use the facility of presumptive taxation, and you need to do everything. You need to maintain the books of account and follow all the provisions completely. Now the fourth topic that we have is the income from capital gains. Now let's see what is the capital gain. Any income derived from a capital asset, movable or immovable. If you have a capital asset, then whether it is movable or immovable, then that would be taxable under the head of capital gains. Okay, now what is the basis of charge? Profit or gain arising from the transfer of capital asset. This thing is very important. The capital asset must have to be transferred during the previous year, then that is a capital gain. If it is a capital asset, what are the capital assets? The capital assets are the assets of the company or the business, and that can be long-term capital asset or a short-term capital asset that we are going to study later. Then there must be a transfer of the capital asset, and that should of course happen in the previous year, and there must be the profit or gains. So if all the conditions are fulfilled, then in that case there will be income from capital gains which is chargeable to tax. Now exceptions to capital asset. What are not coming in the category of capital asset? The first is that any stock in trade, whether it is a consumable store or a raw material which you are using for the purpose of business or profession, then the stock in trade and this all are not the capital asset. Now the second is that movable property of the SSC, including his wearing apparel and the furniture which he is using for his personal use or use of any member of the family. Okay, so that won't be a capital asset, but the exception is that the jewelry, which is of course a personal property also, but it would be treated as a capital asset. Okay, so you have to keep in mind that jewelry will be a capital asset. Now the other thing that we have discussed earlier was that here we have to transfer the capital asset. Now what all the things are coming in the transfer head that we need to study here. So what is included in transfer? If you are selling the thing, if you are exchanging the thing, if you are relinquishment, it means you are relieving your rights, you are leaving your rights for the thing. Then extinguishment, then compulsory acquisition, you have taken anything compulsory. If you are converting the capital asset into a stock in trade, then all these heads are included in transfer. Means if all these transactions are being done, if all these things are being done, then in that case it would be a transfer of a capital asset on which there would be a income from capital gain that we have to charge to tax. Now the next thing is that what is not included in transfer. What we don't have to include is distribution of its asset to shareholders. Suppose the shareholder, the companies are giving its asset at the time of liquidation, etc., then that won't be transfer. Now the distribution of capital asset HUF to its member at the time of total or partial partition, that is also not a transfer. Then transfer of a capital asset under a will or an irrevocable trust, that is not considered as a transfer. Transfer of a capital asset by a company to its wholly owned subsidiary or by its wholly owned subsidiary to the company, means any transfer which is taking place between the company and the subsidiary won't be considered as a transfer. So here we have studied what we are going to include in transfer and what we are not going to include in our transfer. Now, in our capital asset, we have two types of asset, that are the short-term capital asset and the long-term capital asset. So let's see what are these. The short-term capital asset means a capital asset held by the SSE for not more than 36 months, means 3 years. Okay, prior to the date of transfer, for not more than 36 months immediately prior to the date of transfer. It means that we can just determine whether the capital asset was a short term or long term only when we are transferring it. It means we have to just check out the date of purchase of the capital asset and the date of its transfer. If there is a gap of more than 36 months, then that will be a long term capital asset, otherwise it will be a short term capital asset. Now, however, the following assets are treated as short-term assets if they are held for not more than 12 months. Okay, and what are those assets? If you have an equity or preference shares in the company, or the securities like debentures, common securities listed in recognized stock exchange, the units of UTI, units of mutual funds. In all these cases, if you are holding it for more than 12 months, then that also will be counted as a long-term capital asset. Any asset other than a short-term capital asset will be regarded as a long-term capital asset. Then now we come on the topic of how do we calculate the long-term capital gain and the short-term capital gain. In all the cases, in all the both cases, we have to first find out the full value of consideration. Now, what is the full value of consideration? Is the sale amount or at the amount on which you are transferring it. Okay, so from that the full value of consideration, you have to deduct the certain things. The first one is the expenditure incurred wholly and exclusively in the connection of transfer. Then the index cost of acquisition and the index cost of improvement. Actually, we have a cost of index for every year. So what we have to do here, suppose we have purchased our asset before 10 years or 15 years, then of course if you are taking that value at this time, then that will be very low. So what we have to do it, we have to deduct the indexed cost of acquisition. You want to the index, you have to calculate it. Index cost of improvement, if you have spent any amount on improving the asset, then that also you can deduct it from here. Then from resulting sum, we have to deduct the exemption provided by the section 54, 54D. All these things we can deduct from here, and the balancing amount will be the long-term capital gain or maybe a loss. Now the next thing is that the short-term capital gain. And the short-term capital gain, again the same thing, we have to find the full value of consideration. Then we have to deduct the expenditure incurred wholly and exclusively in connection with such transfer. But here we have to take only the cost of acquisition and the cost of improvement. We don't need to index it. The reason being this, that because it's short-term, so it must be purchased in the same year within 12 months. So we don't need to index the cost of acquisition. Then from resulting, we have to deduct the exemption provided by section 54B or D. Then the balancing amount will be the short-term capital gain. Now the last topic is our income from other sources. The last head of income is that the income from other sources. Then in this, any income that does not fall under the four heads above is taxed under the head as income from other sources. Then we have certain examples here. The income from bank deposits which you get, winning from lottery, or sum of money which you are getting from anyone. If it exceeds rupees 50,000, if it is more than rupees 50,000, then that will be income from other source. But that 50,000, if you are receiving from your relative means your mother or father or your spouse, then that won't be counted as an income. But if it is from any other person which is not a relative, that will be income from other source. Then the income from bank interest and the income from dividend, all these are the income from other sources. Then after calculating the income from all the five heads, then there are certain deductions that we can have. The first one is under section 80C. In 80C, the maximum amount of deduction that we can do from a taxable income is rupees 1,50,000, and that deduction can be from the PPF account, EPF account, NSC account or NPS. Then you can have a 5-year tax saving deposit. Then the tax saving mutual funds can be there, the life insurance premium, the Sukanya Samriddhi account, the home loan principal if you have taken, then that can also be deducted from here. But all these should not exceed the maximum amount of rupees 1,50,000. Okay, now under 80CCC we have again a maximum amount reduction of rupees 1,50,000 if you are depositing any sum to pension funds account. Now 80CCD under section 1B we have additional deduction of 50,000, that if you are depositing in the NPS National Pension Scheme, then you can have this deduction also. 80 reduction is of 75,000, which is for the health insurance premium if you are doing it for yourself or for your parents or your dependents. Okay, now 80E is for the interest on education loan if you have taken, so that interest you can use as a reduction for 8 years. Now 80EE is a reduction of rupees 50,000, which can be done for additional reduction on home loan interest, which is applicable only on the fulfillment of certain conditions. Now under 80G we have reduction for donations if you are doing it to a specified funds or charities. Now this is depending upon the case on which you are donating it. It can be 50% to 100%. It can range between these figures. Now 80GG we have reduction of rupees 60,000 if you are paying the rent and you are not receiving any HRA from your employer. Now under section 24 we can have a reduction of rupees 2 lakh, which is the interest on home loan. So just have a look here. The interest on home loan if you are paying in the last year, in the financial year, that's 2 lakh rupees can be deducted here. And if you have paid the home loan principal, then that can be deducted under 80C. Okay, so the income tax act gives us deduction for both the things, or for the principal also and for the interest that we are paying for the home loan. Now 80TTA we have a reduction of rupees 10,000 for the interest on saving banks deposit aggregate, and 80TTB we have a reduction of rupees 50,000 if we are getting it on the saving banks deposits, and that is only for the senior citizens. So here we have studied for the table which are for the tax deductions that can be done from the taxable income, that people normally use it for reducing their tax liability. Now the next thing is for the TDS. TDS is tax deducted as source. Normally what happens that when we are doing payment to someone, then under certain payments we need to deduct tax at that time only before making the payment, and then is a liability to pay that TDS deducted from the person to the government. Okay, now tax deducted source is certain percentage deducted at time of payment of various kind, such as salary, commission, rent and interest on dividend, and the deducted amount we have to remit it to the government account. Now the person or the organization which is deducting the tax is known as the deductor, and the person from whom tax has been deducted is known as the deductee. The principle of TDS is pay as you earn. Okay, so at the same time we are paying the tax to the government also. Okay, and this TDS is based upon the PAN number. PAN number is very necessary because with the help of PAN number we deposit the TDS to the government account. So all these things are there. Now the next thing is the income tax return. Now what is the income tax return? Income tax return is a prescribed form through which the particulars of income earned by a person in the financial year and the taxes which he is paying on such income are communicated to the income tax department after the end of the financial year. When the financial year has ended, then it's duty of the every assessee to just tell the government about the income he has earned and what are the taxes that he has paid on such income, and if he has not paid such tax, then he has to complete the balance payment before filing the return. Now the return covers the period from 1st April to 31st March of the next year, which is known as the financial year. Now in the Income Tax Act we have the thing that whatever income we are earning in 1 year, in one financial year, we have to tax it in the next financial year. So there are two terms here: previous year and the assessment year. Previous year and the assessment year. So the financial year to which the income belongs is will be known as the previous year, and the financial year in which the income is taxed means the next year, that is known as the assessment year. Okay, so if we talk about this time, then this financial year is from 1st April 2020 to 31st March 2021. That will be the previous year, and the assessment year would be 1st April 2021 to 31st March 2022. That's the next year. So these both things that you have to just understand it clearly. If a person who is legally bound to file the return but he doesn't do it within the specified time, then he can have to face a penalty of rupees 5,000 for the non-filing of return. So filing the income tax return is a very important thing that has to be done. Now, types of income tax return. First one is the normal return, that the return is filed within the return filing due date. The due dates we are going to study. Now, the belated return is, it can be filed before expiry of 1 year from the end of the relevant assessment year. When the assessment is ending, then till expiry of 1 year from the end of assessment year, we can file the belated return. The revised return can be revised any time before the expiry of 1 year again. Defective return: if the assessing officer is considering that the return is defective, it has certain problems in it, then the assessee would be intimated about it. The assessing officer would intimate the assessee about it, and then is the duty of the assessee to rectify the return within 15 days. And if he again gives an application, then he can get an extension of 15 days. Now, the fifth one is return in response to notices. There are certain notices which the assessing officer sends to the assessee if he thinks that there are certain problems with the income tax return, or the individual or the assessee has not disclosed everything properly, or again there are many problems in it. So they can just give notices, and then the returns are required to be submitted again and again according to the days that they specify in the notices. Okay, now the next one is that which ITR to file. We have certain types of income tax returns. So the first one is the ITR 1. ITR 1 is filled by the resident individuals who are having the income of less than 50 lakhs, and that income is from salary or pension, or one house property, or from other sources. Just see here, only one house property. If you have only one house property and you are getting the income from it, then you have to file the ITR 1. Then ITR 2 is every income from ITR 1, but it is greater than rupees 50 lakhs. And if you have capital gains also, you have more than one house property, then you have some foreign income or foreign asset. If you are a director in a company, or if you are having some unlisted equity shares, then all these cases you have to file the ITR 2. Then we have the ITR 3. In this, every income that you are getting from ITR 2 means all this you can include here, but apart from it, you are having a business or profession, or the presumptive income that we have discussed earlier is greater than rupees 50 lakhs, or you are a partner in the firm, then in that case you need to file ITR 3. ITR 4, every income from ITR 1, every income that we have studied earlier can be taken here, and presumptive income under salary or pension, other sources, or one house property is there, but the income is greater than rupees 50 lakhs, then you have to file ITR 4. Then we have ITR 5, which is applicable to the LLPs, the AOPs, and the BOIs. So these are the 5 income tax return types that we have studied here. Then the due dates of filing the ITR. The individuals HUF, AOP, and BOI whose accounts are not required to be audited, that they all have to file the return before 31st August. And the businesses whose accounts, books of account require audit, they have to file the ITR before 30 September. And SSC who are required to furnish the report under section 92A, the transfer pricing concept is there, they have to file the return before 30 November. Okay. Then the advance tax. What is the advance tax? It is the income tax payable if your tax liability is more than 10,000 in a financial year. In a financial year, if you have to pay more than 10,000, the liability you have calculated. It means when you are in the starting of the year, in the mid of the year, only you have to calculate the tax that you may earn till the end of the year. And if that is the tax liability is more than rupees 10,000, then we need to pay the advance tax. Then the due dates are on or before 15th June, that's 15% of advance tax. Then before 15th September, you need to pay 45%. Before 15th December, that's 75%. And before 15th March, you have to pay 100% of the advance tax that you have calculated. Now we have penalty provisions under Income Tax Act 1961. We have read about all the things that we have to comply with under the act, and if you are not doing according to it, then what are the penalties? Under section 221 subsection 1, we have the default is penalty for default in making a payment of tax. You are not paying the tax, then that penalty is equal to the tax. Okay, the penalty won't exceed the amount equal to the tax. Now under section 271 subsection 1b, if you are not complying with the notices which the AU is giving you, then that is rupees 10,000 for each failure. Under 271 subsection 1c, if you are concealing, if you are hiding any income, or you are giving inaccurate particulars in the return, then in that case 100% to 300% tax that you are trying to evade will be taken here. Now 272A subsection 1, if you are not able to answer the questions or sign the statements or furnish the information that is being asked to you by the officers, then in that case rupees 10,000 for each failure. 271AA-B, if you have undisclosed some income during such intimation which has been done, then 10%, 20% or 30% of the undisclosed income will be the penalty. Under 271A, if you are not maintaining the books or document under section 44EE, then in that case the penalty will be of rupees 25,000. So friends, here we have discussed about all these things, and in the next video we'll be discussing about the other topics, about the further topics relating to the subject, and that will be of the tax planning, tax avoidance, etc. So if you have watched the whole video and you really understood the topics, then please like and subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot.